Welcome back. I want to, just before we continue the debate, just refer to what PPC Cement CEO Ketsa said. He received a considerable amount of praise recently when he took a R1 million pay cut in order to raise the income of his cement workers. He was quoted saying, "When I started, my salary was 120 times the lowest earner, and just by cutting mine and increasing theirs, we got to 48, and we will get to 40. Chris, is that something we should be thinking about? I mean, and should we get to, I mean, is there some ratio where you can say in a country like ours, that's what we should be looking at?
Well, as I say, it's very subjective. It depends on every industry. For instance, some industries you've got, you're taking on large numbers of unskilled people. There's other where you're actually taking on quite a lot of skilled people, and the gaps in different industries, different companies will actually be different and probably should be so. So one shouldn't say there's a magic elixir number that you could actually go for.
Okay, so let's say that there can't be a precise number, which is what you're saying. I take it that you would not say 40 would be the magic number.
Yes.
But would you say that in every... Okay, but let me probe that. But in every sector...
Yes.
Should CEOs be saying 40? I mean, after all, well, firstly, I suppose, let me put this to you. I just worked this out. If somebody, for example, was earning 10,000 rands a month, they'd be earning 120,000 a year.
Yes.
40 times, that's 4.8 million.
Yes.
Right.
It's not too bad. It's not.
Well, if I earned 4.8 million, I'd be a really happy guy.
Well, let's put it this way. I think there's a problem in a company where you've got the pay and everybody's worked out, and this lowest grade, say, gets 100,000, and you work up and to middle management and senior management, and you've got a structure, etc. And then suddenly when you get to the CFO and the CEO, etc., it just jumps by multiples just for those handfuls. I question that because it just seems to be odd. And certainly when one's looking at to say, you need to reference externally, but you also need to reference internally. And what seems to have happened is that this is the damage I think transparency might have done, is when they said, everybody's got to disclose in their annual report what the CEO gets, and then everybody says, oh, he's getting more than me, we need to up a tier, etc. And so you had this
curiously, what it doesn't do is everybody's saying, gosh, we're earning, what did Gordon say, 120 times what my lowest paid worker is. That's outrageous.
But that I believe is a good approach. In other words, to say, we've got to be very careful of knocking success, and to say because somebody is successful means you are taking away from somebody else.
But let me put this to you. But in a country like South Africa, isn't there something where one has to say, let me put it this way. I mean, one of the things that one learned about Germany after the Second World War was that people tightened their belts and said, until we're all out of this trouble, we're not going to earn a hell of a lot. And we're all going to... And why should we not be saying in South Africa, 5 or 6 million rand is not a bad sum of money. I'm hardly going to have to go to the corner, a burger place, if I'm going to have entertain. And I'm going to do that until such time as we've actually started to address the grinding inequality that we've got.
I certainly agree with you in a large extent, but we've got to actually be careful of saying that the upside is kept in South Africa.
Got you.
We've got to, what we have to do is to say, how can we follow the German and Japanese model to say there's the price of labour and there's the value of labour? And you actually need to say, how can we increase wages in a way that we actually are also adding the value so that we don't need to shed jobs?
Got you. So would you go for a ratio like 40 or 50 to 1, or something of that sort that I was putting to Chris Hart and that Ketsa Gordon's been advocating? Would that be the sort of solution that you would advocate?
I think before getting to the solution, in my view, we need to start looking at, we've talked so much about negotiations and the labor market in South Africa, looking at the lower labor market of workers and mine workers and in other sectors. I think it's time for us to have a very serious debate about the efficiency in the labor market for executives. What are the inefficiencies within this market that drive the prices so high that we can't be able to really match them to productivity?
So the prices of what? Of executive pay?
Of executives. Okay. Because when you look at all media looking at labor, we're looking at prices of workers is above inflation.
Well, let me give you one suggestion, which you've essentially prefigured, when you spoke about the King Commission. I noticed recently in a review of the Piketty book, to which I've made reference, that Larry Summers, who I think now is back at Harvard as an economist, but was, of course, the secretary in the Obama administration, actually said that one of the reasons why executive pay is quite as outrageous as it is because corporate governance has been so hopeless.
I think, yes, I've read lots of studies in the US which are looking at the failures of corporate governance, specifically within the US economy. I think within our own South African economy, given that we have a benchmark which is kind of the King Code, which has been adopted by the exchange, we should be able to look at what is happening inside corporations in line with this code so that we can come up with some robust results that can guide us going forward in terms of policy changes within the area of corporate governance.
So what would you suggest? I mean,
well, I think
I'm anxious about the fact that perhaps we're looking at this in the wrong way, that perhaps we're looking at a world view which may be inappropriate in a country with the kind of levels of inequality that we have, but I don't know. I mean, you're the sociologist, not me.
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is to try to avoid general discussions about the labour market, and we end up talking about people on the bottom. We're here tonight to talk about the people at the top.
In fairness, she was talking about the people at the top. Yeah.
And I think I mean, there are a lot of practical things that can be done. It seems to me that first of all, the whole issue about performance, which CEOs often claim they're paid for performance, performance is not properly spelled out. Companies apparently do not spell out their criteria performance in their annual reports. Remuneration committees, we know, are on the whole far too cosy. We could say that they are meant to have independent executives upon them, which is fine, but it's very difficult, I think, for individuals on those companies to half the time actually understand the stuff they're given by their own employees.
Now you're talking about corporate governance problems.
Yes.
Because they get welters of documentation which are very difficult in the board to understand.
Yeah, and there's very simple things like, for instance, automatically having recognised trade union representatives on remuneration committees.
But can I put this to you? Let's assume that all of that was still hunky-dory in our context, given our Gini coefficient, and the company was doing fabulously. What if the person was earning 30 or 40 million and the lower paid workers were 120 or 140 times less than that? That still would be argued to be unsatisfactory.
I would say that if you have a highly unequal situation like that, it is frankly socially unjust. It is also politically unwise, because we've got to recognise that huge gaps in equality lead to political instability. And I can't but imagine that this country is leading to some sort of explosion unless we seriously tackle the high wages at the top. They're highly inflammatory.
Okay, I want to come to you, but I have to take a break, and then I promise you'll be the first person after our break.
News that moves. ENCA.com.